Hey everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today I want to do some lessons with you for practical life and give you some ideas for some pre-baking activities that you can do in the classroom. And I also want to show you how all these separate lessons work together to make really big lessons, which is what we're going for in that third year of the 3-year cycle. And for my age group, that would be the 6-year-olds, the 5 to 6-year-olds, the kindergartners. So before I start, let me show you first what I'm going to be referencing. So I'm going to be referencing the video where I went through reviewing Montessori Print Shop's free theory booklet. So I'm going to be using a little bit of that. So if you are interested in those materials, make sure to check out this video right here on the free booklet, and I have the links for the booklet below the video. And also I'm going to be referencing one of my favorite online resources, which I go over in one of my videos right here on my favorite online resources for Montessori. So that video, I'm going to reference the Montessori Services for Small Hands catalog. So there's 2 videos that if you're interested in, you can go back and check out if you're interested in those resources. So first, let me go to Montessori for Small Hands. Since we're talking about the baking today, the baking curriculum and practical life, Montessori for Small Hands has a lot of really neat stuff. Now, I personally try to go shopping at a lot of thrift stores, Goodwill. Sometimes you can get some stuff even at the dollar store. It depends on your budget. It depends on the aesthetic quality of the material that you're looking for. If you're looking for more high-end materials that maybe are matching and all of that kind of stuff, or something really particular, I'd say start out at the Small Hands for Small Hands catalog. They've got a lot of food prep for young children, baking materials for young children, serving and cleanup. So all that stuff is really great if you're looking for practical life materials. This place has it all, but also check out the thrift stores. For instance, let's click under baking here for a second. You've got child size. They're real materials, but they're child size, right? We've got measuring cups. Oh, look at the sifting flour. That one's pretty cool. Anyways, I like these measuring cups. I don't know if I haven't actually worked with them, but I always like the looks of them when I see them. So anyways, spice grinder, all that stuff. So they have a lot of interesting things on this website. The other thing I want to reference is, let me see if I can transition here to the next one. And that's the free booklet. So let me go there. And let's do that. And that is, let me bring it up on my side. Here we go. Right here is that free booklet that I was talking about in my previous video that I went over. It's not 100% like my AMI album, but they do a pretty good job, and it's a free resource. So if you're looking for something with a list of all the exercises, and right here, this is the practical life section on this booklet. I'm on page 10, but it goes on all the different lessons. There's some extra lessons that are than what are in my album. And then if you see this red print here, that's not on their booklet. That's something I typed in just for notes, because I wanted to make sure and go over with you when we're looking at practical life, when we're doing all these exercises, there's some things to keep in mind. And one is, what is the direct and indirect purpose of all these activities that we're doing in the practical life area? What is the direct and indirect purpose of these pre-baking activities? And the first one, and if you're going into training or you've been through training, this will sound very familiar. One of the most important things for the practical life area, one of the biggest things you're going to hear about the practical life area, is that it's important because of the control and coordination of movement. That's going to be the direct purpose in pretty much every activity in the practical life album. So control and coordination of movement and the development of the hand, building those muscles in the hand, building the pincer grip. Everything in the practical life area is pretty much geared towards that direct purpose, which is an extremely important aspect of Montessori. So the second direct and indirect purpose for these practical life activities are developing independence, right? You want your child to not come to you with every single need. You want them at 2.5 to 3 years old to start being able to do a few things for themselves, and that is an important purpose of the practical life area. And the third one I have on here is the logical sequence or order. So developing that mathematical mind. So how does practical life develop the mathematical mind? Well, every activity in the practical life area, every work has a logical order. So if you are going to training or think about going to training, or you're trying to implement a curriculum at home, or you just really love Montessori and want to understand why it works, well, when you're going through a lesson or you're creating a brand new lesson, sit down and think about the logical sequence of steps. Logical sequence of steps, the logical order is part of the mathematical mind. And at 2.5 to 3 years old, that's where we start with math. We start with that sense of order, that sense of logic, sequence, sequential order. That's all part of math. So keep that in mind as you're going through your practical life activities. Also, and this is another big one for Montessori, is the development of concentration. These activities in the practical life area are meant for the child to repeat and repeat and repeat, because something about that work will call to the child, and they'll develop concentration, and they're going to do it over and over again. And why are they doing that? What is it that makes them do that? One, they're doing that because they want to perfect themselves. They want to perfect these qualities inside themselves. They want to perfect these skills. And so when we talk about practical life, we're talking a lot about the sensitive period for the refinement of movement. They have movement, right? 2.5-year-olds, 3-year-olds, they have movement. Now they have to refine that movement. And so there's that inner need in the child to refine their movement. That's why children follow the law of maximum effort, while the adult follows the law of minimum effort. We don't want to put that much work into it, right? But a child needs to put effort into their work, and they're supposed to, because of that refinement of movement. It's that sensitive period for it. And all of that helps them develop concentration. And if you can develop concentration, you can do anything, right? That's an essential skill for learning. There are a lot of things that I'm not good at learning. There's a lot of things that I struggle with. But if I have concentration, if I can concentrate, I can master it. Might not be the best at it, but I can master it. And I can do things because I can concentrate. And that is a value that I really think is one that we're losing in our culture, because everything's broken up by little segments. We're constantly interrupting people's concentration. We're constantly interrupting children. If you are watching a TV show, if you're watching a show with your kids, just think about how many times even that show gets interrupted by commercials or something else. So even amongst things that we might consider to be detrimental to concentration, their concentration is still being broken. So development of concentration, we want them to go back to these materials. We want them to go back to these exercises and repeat them and develop concentration. And if they're not developing concentration through these materials, it might be that you just have to keep trying different practical life materials until you find the one that resonates with the child. But there will be one, especially at that age, about 3 years old, there definitely will be one that will resonate with them, and they will develop concentration. They'll begin to normalize through that. So in all of these practical life activities, which there's a nice list here, and a lot of them are very, very similar to my AMI album, there's something we call the point of interest in each activity. And the point of interest in each exercise here is basically you want to think about what part of the exercise, of the work, develops concentration. What is it that inspires the child to repeat this exercise? And every single exercise, every single work, there's going to be something that happens that really interests the child and causes them to repeat. And that repetition is what creates the concentration. So we call that the point of interest. And it could be as simple as the sound of something, or watching how something happens. So there's something about it that captures the child's interest and causes them to repeat. And we call that the point of interest. And we always look for that in our practical life exercises. And if you're adding a new exercise into your practical life album, if you've been teaching for a while and you want to add something new, just think through these steps first. Think through, first of all, what do you need? How do you break it down into a logical sequence of order? What's the direct purpose? What's the indirect purpose? And what do you think the point of interest is of each exercise? So that's what we're going to look at when we're going through our practical life, exercises. And so now, let me just give you a list of exercises I would include in a pre-baking curriculum. And I'm just adding this on. A lot of this comes from my Montessori album. So for interest, for example, this is going to be, these exercises I've listed on here are about 2.5 to 4 years old. This is when I would introduce these lessons. And we'd introduce spooning, pouring, squeezing a sponge, wringing in a cloth, wiping or crumbing a table, measuring with a teaspoon and measuring with a measuring cup, which is not a lesson in my AMI album. It's one I added. Sweeping the floor, washing hands, washing a table, washing dishes. And other lessons you can consider as part of pre-baking is using a whisk, sifting flour, using a funnel, doing laundry, folding napkins, folding aprons, setting a table. All of this fits into pre-baking lessons, and all of this we want to give lessons for individually. And a lot of these lessons are in an AMI album. They're also going to be found in that free booklet that I referenced you to. You're going to see a breakdown of all those lessons. And we teach everything in a sequential order. We break it down to its smallest component, focus on that one skill, and then we start combining skills, right? We want to start out with an isolation of difficulty, like I talk about in my other videos. There's always an isolation of difficulty. We want to do one new thing at a time. And once we learn, let's say 4 or 5 new things, like how to spoon, how to pour, how to crumb a table, wipe a table, we can start combining those things and putting them together. And what happens when we put it together? We're adding multiple steps, which makes the lesson longer, right? More steps for the child to remember, more steps for the child to do. So not only are they concentrating longer, they have more complicated steps, more logical sequence of order being all put together. This is going to develop concentration. It's going to develop the muscles in the hand. It's going to do control and coordination of movement, right? It's going to start adding all those and compounding those and putting all those things together. So it just gets more complicated. So when you want to actually have your child bake, they'll have all the individual lessons on what to do, and then you're going to put them all together for a huge lesson. So when I introduce baking bread with my students, I don't have to do anything. I'll come over and check once in a while, make sure they're on track and see if they need help getting started. Once I have one that's got it, that one older child is the one that ends up helping all the rest of the class when they're going through it for the first time. But basically when they bake bread, they're doing, not only are they doing the recipe, they're following the recipe card. They know how to measure. They know how to sweep the floor. They know how to sweep and crumb the table. They know how to wash the table. They've had a lesson on doing dishes. They know how to set a table. They know how to fold laundry. They know how to, we actually have washing laundry in the classroom. So it is a work that we have in there. So they've had all of these lessons separately. And so when I take them to bake bread, and we're not just baking bread, we're combining almost a dozen lessons and putting them together. So I just want you to think of, yes, it's really, we start really, really, really small, but just think what you're creating when you add it all together. Your child is fully independent by 6 years old to bake bread, with maybe you helping them get it into the oven and out of the oven, right? We don't want them to burn themselves, but some of you may feel comfortable doing that at 6 years old. Others may be like, no, I think I'd rather wait a couple more years before they touch the oven. That's up to you. But they'll have the skills to do everything else. All right. Now, with that being said, I'm going to switch to showing you some presentations of some of these practical life exercises so you can get a better idea of it. And I'm going to start out with something as simple as spooning and pouring. And then I'm going to show you my activity that I do for simple measuring. And when I do measuring with a small spoon, you can do a teaspoon or just a small spoon. That's what I would start with. So I'll show you that, and then I'll go into what it's like to start measuring with a spoon, and then you can switch to a teaspoon and then a measuring cup. So let's switch over to the camera. It might be a little awkward because I have to have my camera like right in front of me. And let me adjust the lighting real quick. There it is. And as you can see in front of me, I have a spooning work. Now, I have, like most Montessori programs, I have breakable glass things. And one of the reasons why we use it is because, first of all, we want it to be beautiful. And the second thing is we want consequence in our actions. And I mean that on multiple different levels. One, we want to teach the child to be careful. If it breaks, the child, that's the control of error for the child. Oh, I was too rough with it and I broke, and now there's a consequence. I can't go back and use this anymore. And so we want the child to experience consequences. We want them to experience what it's like to work with beautiful, fragile things so that they have an awareness of their body and how rough they're being with it. And also we want them to experience the work in a way that they can't really do if we're working with plastic. And that's going to relate to the point of interest. So let me show you what spooning looks like. And I have to work around my camera and my microphone, so I'm a little clumsy at this because of that. Haven't quite figured out how to work with a camera in the middle and a microphone on the side, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So here is spooning. And let's pretend I finished all of that. I don't want to take up all your time, but that's essentially how we do spooning. First of all, we pick it up with our left hand. We send it over to our dominant right. Now, if you're left-handed, you're going to want to consider, do you want to train yourself to use your right hand, or do you want to use your left hand? It depends. That's a judgment call every left-handed teacher has to make. But I put it over into my dominant hand, and notice the back of the spoon goes here. See that, and then I bring it over, and it's very slow, and it goes into here. Now notice my pincer grip is being developed, right? Holding the spoon develops the pincer grip. Now we want to show that the spoon comes forward towards me. And what do you think the point of interest is in this? We've got the direct purpose, right, that we went through. But what do you think? Where's that point in the activity that would call to the child and have them repeat? What do you think that would be? In my album, it's the sound, which is one of the reasons why we want to do porcelain and glass and all those things that are maybe even metal, right? Not so much wood for this one because you're not going to hear it quite as nicely. But if you wanted to try it with wood, I would try all the natural materials, and then the child can experience the sound. Might also be the sense of being empty or full. So this right here, this bowl is going to end up being empty when we finish it, right? And I'm trying to show you without it going too dark. So we're going to finish it, and that's might be a point of interest too, is that child trying to get those last few kernels out. That might be a point of interest that might interest them. The empty and full, that might be of interest to them. Oh, look at that, one left. All right, well now what do we do? Because we've gone from the left to the right, now our left one's empty. So now we have to switch. And now the left side is full again. And why don't we just pour it? Why don't we go back and forth? We want to really keep that left to right sense of order in there. We really want to the child to understand the left to right sense of order. And this might be a little confusing when we get into pouring, and I'll show you why, but there's some logic behind it. But anyways, that part is spooning. Now you're thinking, I can tell already, this is going to be a great big mess at my house. The child is going to spill. They're going to be all over. There's going to be corn kernels, and you don't have to use corn. You can use seeds, lentils, whatever makes that sound, right? Make sure you're taking into consideration the sound. But that's okay. It's okay for them to make a mess because we always have a lesson for that. Now you can go to Montessori Small Hands and get a really fancy metal and wood crummer. I went to the dollar store. I have a little plastic one. Ideally, yes, I'd love a nice quality crummer. I have not bought one for myself. So right now I have the dollar store one, and we just sweep it up, right? So if they get some kernels on the table, on the floor, we have brooms and we have crummers, right? And we're just going to have teach the child to crumb up the messes, and they can throw it away, or if you're like me and have chickens, you can go feed the chickens, right? So we've got some good uses. So that is spooning and crumbing. So we can teach the child whenever there's a mess. That's an opportunity to teach them another skill in isolation, right? So now, let me switch out. So that's an important skill because we are going to have to use a spoon to do baking. That's a pretty common thing. But let me set that aside and bring over pouring, because this is another really great work for a 2.5-year-old. 2.5 to 3. I've even seen some 4-year-olds do this one. As you can see, this time the popcorn kernels, they're going on the right side and not the left. And that's because, typically speaking, the dominant hand is right. And we're going to start with that right hand. So that's why it's a little different for this one. I know that might be confusing. Hopefully I don't spill too much with these, because these aren't actually tiny pitchers. They're salt and pepper shakers. So they're not very easy to pour. I wouldn't recommend this as your pouring work, but let's check it out. All right, so that was pretty simple. I hope you paid attention to some of the aspects of it. I lifted both pitchers into the air and I poured right to left and then left to right. Now, a child that has that point of interest of that sound of the pouring material and watching it go back and forth, they're going to do this over and over and over again without stopping. They're just going to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that's exactly what you want to see when they are developing that skill and they're really getting into it. You really want to see them going back and forth. And if they need to pick up a few kernels that get lost along the way, or whatever it is you have in your pitchers at home, that's okay. So the point of interest right here is the sound, and maybe watching that last little kernel. I don't know if you noticed, but I had one that got stuck that first time through and I had to get it out. That can be a point of interest as well. Also, take a look. We're doing that pincer grip again. That's going to develop the muscles in the hand for writing. And that is essentially how you start pouring. And then when you get into pouring, you can switch to water. Let's say we're getting water. And usually I have a nice mat, a protector underneath of this, oilcloth, cutting, like one of those thin cutting boards work really well too. I don't have water in these at the moment, but I'll just show you. I'm going to pour. We'd use our little sponge to wipe up any drips. We go back and we could pour again. And we just go back and forth doing that. Point of interest. What do you think the point of interest is? Well, could be wiping up any little drips. It could be the sound of the water going back and forth. It could be, so the point of interest could be not spilling any water, right? And if they do spill water, remember before I listed on my list, you could do, we have squeezing a sponge and wringing a cloth as two of our works that we put out in our classroom. So they have that isolation of difficulty of working separately with just a sponge. So they get used to how a sponge works, and they get used to wringing a cloth, so they know how to not just soak up the water with a cloth, but how to wring it out so that it doesn't drip. So those are the ways in which we use those lessons in isolation, and then we're going to bring it together when we start doing baking and washing the table and washing hands and all of that stuff. All the stuff where we work with water. So you would be pouring dry materials and then pouring wet materials. And then I like to start getting into what I do for baking, because I know a lot of people don't have this in their albums. It's something you kind of wonder, like, how do you start? So let me set this up. I forgot to grab an actual baking teaspoon, so I'm just going to use this teaspoon again. So what do I have? I have a bowl full of salt right here. I have an empty pitcher right here. This is going to be my teaspoon for measuring. Ideally, I would switch this out with a real teaspoon, but I forgot to grab one before I started this. So we're going to see if we can make this work. I like to use a little craft stick to help level off the salt. And right here, I'm adding a brush. And I'll show you what I'll do with that brush. That's if we make a mess. So first of all, we're going to measure, right? We're going to do that scooping, and we've done scooping before, right? We've done the spooning before in our previous activity, so now we're going to use it here. But take a look, I have all this salt on top. I'm going to use my craft stick. I'm going to level that off, maybe tap it. And I'm going to pour it into the pitcher, right? You can do it that way. And I'm going to keep going. The child can do this as many times as they want. Get a heap of salt or baking soda. Level it off. And the child can do this as many times as they want. They can empty the whole bowl. They can spoon all of it into this pitcher. And when they're done, they simply go like this. They're just going to pour it back in there. And where have we seen the pouring before? Both in the dry pouring and in the wet pouring. So we're adding a couple of these different skills together. This is really great for about 3 years old. Now I said this brush is if we make a mess, right? So let me show you how I would use that. Let me put my spoon to the side. Again, this might be a good one to put a protector with, a little oilcloth, something to keep your table or your furniture clean. Let me put this bowl where you can see it. I'm going to take my tray. That way, if I spill a bunch of salt, I can use my little brush to brush it back in there. Similar to crumbing, right? Because we want to take care of our work. We want to put everything back on the tray as beautiful as where we found it. And that goes back on the shelf. Now, I would start with a 3-year-old with this one. And then once they master this, then I'd start getting into something bigger, like flour. And if I was doing flour, what I would do is I'd get a bigger bowl, bigger cup, right? Everything needs to be bigger. A bigger pitcher, like let's say even something like this, right? And we get a big bowl of flour. Now, we want to keep it from getting too messy, right? So what I would do is when I'm working with this, I would use a spoon to scoop my flour into my measuring cup. Just keep going. And I'd fill it all up, right? And it's a little awkward with my camera and I'm running out of space at the moment. But you're going to fill it up. And if they get too much, again, level it off. And then you can pour it into your big cup of flour, and the child can do this as many times as they like. Here's one thing that we're going to teach children when they're filling up their measuring cup. It is really, really, really tempting when you're filling it full of flour to pat it down, right? We love to pat that flour down, make sure it's nice and flat. Children love this. I think adults love it too. However, that is not something we want to do with baking because when we put flour into a cup, it's meant to be measured loosely. It's not, so if you pat it down, you're adding extra flour, right? You're adding extra weight. And so we want it to be a nice loose flour. We don't want it patted down because that actually changes the measurements. It adds more flour onto it than what the recipe calls for. So we want to simply scoop it in, level it off, keep that flour nice and light and fluffy, and then transfer it into our big measuring cup, right? And when we're done, you can use a funnel to put it back as well. This might be a chance for you to work with a funnel. Transfer it back in there. If you need, use your crumber to clean it up. If you need a funnel, if you're working maybe with a big mason jar and you want it to go back into a big mason jar, maybe get a funnel and put it on there and they can pour it through a funnel. And so those are just some pre-baking activities. That is how I kind of start things off in my classroom. I go through those preliminary exercises of spooning, pouring, squeezing a sponge, wringing a cloth, wiping and crumbing a table, measuring with a teaspoon, measuring with a measuring cup, sweeping the floor, washing hands, washing a table. I show them how to do dishes. You can show them how to use a whisk, sift with the flour, use a funnel. And then, of course, when we're all done with all this stuff, we're wearing aprons to protect our clothes. So you got to wash the aprons, right? You might want to fold some napkins because if you're baking bread and you want to eat it afterwards, you need to set the table and fold some fancy napkins. And all of those are works we have in the primary classroom, especially for those 3-year-olds. And even though these activities are really simple and really short, remember we're combining it together so that when the kindergartner comes along and they want to combine all those skills to get together and just think really big. When you think with your kindergartners, what you want them to do, they should already have all these individual skills and think big. Because there is nothing a kindergartner likes more than a big challenge. And of course, we want them, for baking bread, for a lot of my students, that might take the entire day to get this whole process done because they'll get it out in the morning and they'll do all the baking that goes with it. They'll wash their hands, they'll set up the table, they'll get all their recipe things together, they'll make the bread, they'll let it rise. If it's a yeast bread, you got to let it rise. And then while the bread is rising, that's when they crumb the table, they sweep the floor, they wash the table, then they got to wash the dishes. And so they'll do all that stuff while the bread is rising. And then while the bread is baking, they can wash their laundry, they can set tables, they can fold napkins and invite people to enjoy the bread once it's done. Because ultimately, when we're making bread, we're not making it for one child. We're serving it to others. So think of that as an opportunity for the child to serve others. And yes, we want them to try a piece of whatever it is they're baking, of course. But ultimately, we want them to cut it up. We want them to serve it to everyone in the classroom. And that's really a grace and courtesy lesson of how to offer food to other people. And that also helps other children understand grace and courtesy of how to accept something from another child or decline. You can say, oh, no, thank you, or yes, please, right? We want to work on those grace and courtesy skills when we offer food or something of that sort to another child. So that is what I have for you today. I hope all of that made sense. I hope you enjoyed it. If something didn't make sense or if you have a question about how to put a baking curriculum together, I also have baking recipes I can share with you if you're interested in that. Just let me know down below about what you're interested in and what you would like more information on, and I will try to make a more targeted video for whatever people's needs are based on any comments below. With that being said, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. It's a new channel. It's a small channel. I'm looking to grow it. So any chance you can share it with somebody or that it might help somebody, I would love for you to share it with others, and help me out by commenting below. Until then, though, I will see you in the next video, which I'm hoping to do maybe a little more information on math materials. So I might switch back to math, but I'm also looking for people to collaborate with so we can have some deep Montessori discussions. So whatever you're interested in, just leave that comment below as well, and I will see you in the next video.